Draco Malfoy, and why in Merlin's name is it always Harry? By Draco, we'll hear about this. Chapter 3. Hermione, the Defender of Elf Rights, and Moody, the Nightmare. Hermione, Draco sighed, rubbing his temples as Harry hid his smile behind his divination homework. I do admire your sense for justice and your determination to help creatures in need. No, I really do, he stressed when Hermione opened her mouth, eyes narrowed. But you chose the wrong creatures for your rescue mission. Believe me, I have lived in a house cared for by house elves for all my life, and they die of shock if I offered them payment. That's because they're brainwashed, she hissed. You have to see it as a difference in cultural values, Draco insisted. You kept telling me over the years that muggles aren't worse off for the lack of magic in their lives, and that their way of living and their existence is not worthless because of it. And what exactly does this have to do with the enslavement of creatures? She demanded. I'm saying that it's arrogant to force your own views on people of other cultures if they refuse to accept them just because you think it's the right way to live. No, listen to me, he insisted when Hermione was about to interrupt. It's an insult to them to offer wages. I agree that these elves are not treated right, especially by people like my father, and if you want to raise your voice for laws to protect them, I'm all for that. But they don't want to be paid, and it's pointless to waste your energy pushing them to accept your ideas. Legal protection is going to be one of the long-term goals of SPEW, Hermione replied coolly. But we are not going to be silenced until these elves are offered the same rights as wizards, and if you aren't with us on that, Draco, you are against us. Draco slumped in his seat, looking at Harry imploringly, but the other was vehemently avoiding his gaze, still biting his lip to keep from grinning. He turned to Weasley for support instead. Say something, he demanded. You're a pureblood as well. You know as well as I do that what she's doing is pointless. Weasley shrugged, taking a bite of his sandwich. I told her already, he said, his mouth full. But she won't listen, and you know it's better to just let her do what she wants instead of trying to change her mind. You're a big help, as always, he muttered. He's not wrong, you know, she glared. I admit that I'd hope for your support, but I will go through with this no matter what you say. You might as well drop it now. You brought it up, Draco reminded her, but when she ignored his input, he just huffed and turned back to his tribes homework. Whatever, just don't pull me into this. I won't, she snapped. Good! He rolled his eyes, finally turning back to Harry, effectively ending the conversation. Have you already had a class with Moody? No, Harry replied, dropping his book to meet Draco's eyes at last. We have him in a double session tomorrow after lunch. You? I have him first thing tomorrow morning, Draco said. I'm quite curious about his classes. Father has raged about him being a lunatic quite a lot at home, but I don't trust his judgment anymore, so... Dad likes him a lot, Weasley joined in, though it does seem to be true that he's lost his marbles at some point in the last couple of years. Dumbledore wouldn't let him teach here if he thought he was in any way unsuitable, Hermione frowned. He let Lockhart teach here, Draco snorted. I think applicants for the job are so rare that he'll take what he can get. Fred and George had him earlier today, and they said his class was something else, Weasley said. They seemed really impressed. Well, I hope he's worth his wage, Draco sighed. I don't expect another Professor Lupin, but I'd rather not go back to useless narcissist or two-faced Death Eater level. I don't think you need to worry about the second one with a former aura, Hermione mused. Obviously, you have more trust in the Ministry than I have, Hermione, Draco sighed. Nothing against your father and brother, Weasley, but there's a heck of corruption going on in the shadows. I should know since my father is part of it. He has Dumbledore's trust, Hermione repeated. Yeah, but Dumbledore is not always the sanest himself, is he? Weasley smirked. They probably get along fabulously. Draco and Harry laughed, but quickly stopped when Hermione threw them a bad-tempered look and returned to their homework. When both the fourth-year Ravenclaws and Slytherins were filing into the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom after breakfast the next morning, there was a weird tension in the air. The Ravenclaws seemed mainly excited, if a little suspicious, regarding Moody's qualities as a teacher, but the Slytherins all seemed anxious, and Draco could understand why. Alistair Mad-Eye Moody, as a retired Auror who had spent his life chasing down the likes of their parents, seemed unlikely to take kindly to their house in general. It turned out their fears were justified, though Draco was still taken aback by the fierce hate Moody seemed to harbor not only for Slytherin House, but also for him, personally.
"Put those blasted books away,"
Moody snapped at the lot of them as they set their materials on their desks.
"No use for them in here. I'm not a big believer in the theoretical approach to learning magic, and you're too far behind on the practical side of the fence as it is."
Draco saw two Ravenclaws at the table next to his. Padma Patil and Sue Lee exchanged wary glances as if their suspicions had just been confirmed.
"Anyways, we're going to work on dark curses today,"
Moody continued, a nasty smile forming on his lips.
"And I imagine the snakes among you don't need much theory on those as it is."
Draco heard his housemates shift nervously in their seats, but Draco stood his ground, defiantly keeping his gaze on Moody. He refused to be intimidated for a reputation his father had acquired. He was not his father. The determination in his face seemed to catch Moody's attention, and his eyes landed on him.
"You're Lucius Malfoy's son, are you not?"
he barked out, smirking when Draco agreed.
"Just the person I need. Why don't you tell us what you know about the unforgivable curses? You should be an expert on them, considering your family."
Draco's eyes narrowed, but it was the only sign of anger he allowed to show. "The unforgivable curses are the 3 dark curses that are most heavily punished by wizarding law," he answered smoothly. "The use of only one of them will give you a life sentence in Azkaban."
"Yes, it would,"
Moody agreed.
"Under normal circumstances. Of course, there are always wizards that wriggle their way out of legal punishment, are there not?"
Draco did not move a muscle, so Moody quickly continued.
"Name one of them, Malfoy."
"The Imperious Curse," Draco responded without missing a beat.
"Oh, you would know about that one,"
Moody snorted.
"The claim of it being used on him saved your own father from a run-in with the Dementors, did it not?"
Draco heard some faint chuckles from among the students, but knew for once that they did not originate from his housemates. Draco was not surprised that the Ravenclaws enjoyed the scene playing out in front of them. They had never forgiven Draco, or Hermione, for beating them in every exam yet. Moody, though, ignored them and turned towards his desk, opening one of the drawers. He pulled out a glass jar that contained 3 large spiders. The class was completely silent as he lured one of the spiders out onto his hand and held it out for all of them to see. With the other hand, he pointed his wand at the spider and muttered,
"Imperio."
The spider was starting to do all kinds of ridiculous things, flinging itself through the air like an acrobat or dancing like a ballerina, and there were the sounds of various gasps among the students, but despite the rather funny picture the spider made, no one laughed.
"Total control,"
Moody said softly, his eyes on the spider as it made cartwheels across one of the desks.
"I could make it do everything in this state, but I assume most of you are very aware of the effects of this spell, are you not?"
His magical eye cursed over the classroom, stopping once on every student with Death Eater connections before he continued.
"For those without personal experiences like these, let me explain. Years ago, a certain dark wizard and his followers had taken to control a lot of people by means of this very curse. When he felt though, it turned out to be the perfect excuse for exactly these followers to escape consequences. How, after all, could the ministry prove whether one had acted by his own will or by someone else's?"
He held in for a moment, face grim as he watched the spider break into a step dance.
"The Imperious Curse can be fought, and I'll be teaching you how, though I don't expect many of you to succeed. It takes real strength of character to throw it off, and that's not exactly a trait I associate with one of your houses."
He barked out a laugh and picked up the spider, throwing it back into the jar. Then he once more turned to Draco, his good eye gleaming.
"Now, Malfoy,"
he continued,
"why don't you keep enlightening us, since you seem to be such an expert? Name another curse."
Draco felt the looks of contempt from the Ravenclaws on the back of his head, but he refused to shrink down in the face of such unfair, premature judgment. He knew if it had been Harry, he'd have fought him. After all, he had seen him get into countless quarrels with Snape like that, always ending with him in detention. But he had more self-control than that, and he was not going to give this professor the satisfaction. So he forced his voice into calm professionalism as he answered, "The Cruciatus curse."
Yes.
Moody smiled, his scarred face contorting under the strain.
I have personal experience with that one, too, don't you, Malfoy? Your aunt was imprisoned for that one, among other things, of course.
"I was a toddler when that happened," Draco ranted inwardly. "I don't even remember her. What she did has nothing to do with me. Don't throw me in with these people. Have I not proved myself enough in the last couple of years?" But he voiced none of this, only watching impassively as Moody picked up another spider and enlarged it for illustration purposes.
"Crucio,"
Moody muttered, pointing his wand at the spider. The effect was immediate, and Draco flinched as it shuddered and jerked in pain. He averted his eyes, focusing it on the foot of the desk instead, waiting for it to be over.
"Excruciating pain,"
Moody announced, his voice almost echoing in the tense silence.
"Worse torture than any Muggle device could ever inflict. It can break a person completely, that curse."
He finally ended the curse and shrank the spider back to its original size before putting it back into the jar. He turned to Draco once more, his eyes a challenge.
"And the last one?"
He prodded.
"You should be familiar with that one, too, seeing that you're friends with the only person known to survive it."
Draco's chest tightened at those words. He needed a few moments to find his voice and answer. "The killing curse," he finally brought out. Moody did not say anything. He just picked the last spider from the jar and held it out for all of them to see.
Avada Kedavra.
A flash of green light hit the spider, and Draco stared, horrified, as the spider rolled onto its back, clearly dead. The answering silence in the room was total. Moody dropped the dead spider onto the floor in a careless gesture, brushing his hands off on his robes.
"There is no counter-curse,"
he announced, almost conversationally.
"No way of blocking it, either. You'd better hope you're never on the receiving end of it, or this green light will be the last thing you'll ever see."
The prolonged silence at those words was interrupted by the bell signaling, thankfully, the end of the lesson.
"Right,"
Moody said gruffly.
"Class dismissed."
Draco, without consciously deciding to move, was on his feet and out of the room at lightning speed. He did not stop until he had reached the next bathroom, where he emptied his morning's breakfast right into the toilet. His stomach felt like it was filled with snakes winding themselves through his organs and causing him to dry heave even when his stomach was already empty. He was shaking from head to toe, and his eyes were prickling with tears. He had known, of course, that Harry had survived the killing curse. Everyone knew it. But the visual of how close his best friend had come to dropping dead like that spider, its life lost as randomly and inconsequentially that it was just brushed onto the floor like dirt. It had shaken Draco deeply, and he curled in on himself upon the cold, hard floor in front of the toilet, hugging his knees close to his chest and taking deep, steadying breaths. "Thank you, old Malfoy," Weasley called, his voice impatient as Draco joined them in front of the potions classroom, barely in time. "How was your class of meeting? What did they teach you?"
"Draco, are you okay?"
Harry cut Weasley off, taking in the greenish tint Draco knew his face was spotting. "I'm fine," he said gruffly, unwilling to talk about what had just happened in this classroom. Thankfully, Snape threw open the door just a moment later, so his friends were kept from asking further questions. Though Draco could feel Harry's eyes on his face, the worry radiating off him in waves. As Snape turned to the blackboard to list the ingredients needed for today's potion, Draco reached a hand over to Harry underneath the desk. He found the wrist of his left hand and pressed his fingers to it, letting the steady pulse he felt calm his nerves. Harry let him for a couple of moments before shifting his hand to lace their fingers together, squeezing Draco's hand in comfort. Draco squeezed back, his eyes focused on the blackboard. Draco knew he could not escape the conversation forever, and after potions, Harry practically pulled him out of the dungeons, murmuring to Hermione and Weasley that he would join them at lunch later before dragging him out of the castle and out to the grounds, which were bathed in the last feelers of summer weather.
Now, tell me what happened, Harry demanded, rounding in on him. You look like someone died.
Draco flinched at Harry's choice of words. He took a steadying breath and started walking in the direction of the lake, feeling the need to move. It was nothing, really, he shrugged. Moody just showed a couple of spells in class, and I couldn't stomach them very well.
What kind of spells?
Harry asked, falling into step beside him. Unforgivables, Draco muttered, and at Harry's confused frown, he added, You'll see for yourself later. You have him after lunch, right? Harry nodded absent-mindedly, his eyes still on Draco's face. He also doesn't like me much, Draco added to stir away from the topic. He threw me in right with my father.
That's ridiculous. Harry bristled. You could have been more different from him if you tried. It's not fair of him to judge you for something you've never had any influence on.
Well, that's how it works, though, isn't it? Draco shrugged. Weasley was the same back in the first 2 years. And Snape does the same to you, really. I guess old grudges die hard. Harry hummed in agreement, clearly displeased with the idea of Draco being mistreated by their new teacher, and it made him feel a little better about the whole incident. As long as Harry was on his side and got angry at the idea of people grouping Draco in with his father, he did not care what Moody or anyone else said, he decided.
Well, Harry muttered, you're not the only one to dislike Moody by the looks of it. Did you notice the horrible mood Snape was in today?
No surprise there, Draco snorted. He snatched the position he's always wanted away from him. He'll never take kindly to any new defense against the dark arts teacher, ever. Mark my words. Their conversation flowed further into that direction after, and soon Hermione and Weasley caught up with them, joining them with a couple of packed sandwiches. They sat down on the grass near the lake, enjoying the sunlight and delving into pleasant topics far away from Moody or unforgivable curses. The Gryffindor's lesson with Moody went better than his own, though not by much, as far as he could tell. Weasley naturally was completely taken by the new teacher, given that Moody seemed to have shown a liking to all Weasley children due to his appreciation of their father. Harry and Hermione seemed a little wearier. While Harry agreed with Weasley that the presentation of the unforgivable curses throughout class had been impressive, he seemed quiet and shaken when he saw them before dinner. Hermione, on the other hand, seemed very disapproving of his teaching methods. You should have seen Neville's face when he cast the Cruciatus curse on that spider, she muttered, her lips tight for a moment before she continued. I agree that school has a responsibility to prepare us, but I'm not sure performing these curses in a classroom was entirely necessary. Yeah, Draco agreed, his eyes finding the back of Longbottom's head in the crowd of students. He had never heard the details of what had happened to Longbottom's parents, only that they had been attacked by Death Eaters shortly after the end of the First War. Draco could imagine that seeing dark curses like these performed in front of him would open old wounds. He did not voice his thoughts to his friends, though, instead continuing, I get the Imperious Curse if he really wants to teach us how to throw it off, which I think is great, by the way. But the other two, I am sure he could have gotten the point across differently if he'd wanted to.
I don't think he wanted to, though, Harry mused. I think he's counting on the shock factor.
He's not wrong, is he? Weasley shrugged. He definitely made an impression. I'm more likely to remember anything he teaches than, say, Professor Binns. Well, you've always had a slight sensationalist streak, Draco injected. Not everyone needs to be frightened into remembering course materials. Weasley glared, opening his mouth to retort, but Harry spoke over him, announcing that he was hungry and wanted to eat. So they separated for their respective house tables, and as Draco took a seat, he looked up at the staff table to find Moody's magical eye trained upon him. Draco held the gaze, staring back defiantly until Professor Sprout offered Moody some potatoes, effectively distracting him. Harry was waiting for Draco in the entrance hall the next morning, a bunch of sandwiches in hand, asking him to take a walk over the grounds. Draco knew this meant he had things to share with him, so he accepted the sandwiches and followed Harry outside. The morning air was chilly, and Draco pulled his school robes tighter around himself, looking at Harry inquiringly.
I got an answer from Sirius last night, Harry muttered, his expression dark. He's heading back north.
What? Draco gasped, almost dropping his sandwich. Why?
Because my letter worried him.
Harry spat.
It was stupid to write to him. Now he thinks I'm in danger, and he needs to come back here, and if he gets caught, it will be my fault.
It's not your fault, Draco said gently. You were looking for advice from someone more experienced than your friends, and Sirius was the obvious choice. You did not ask him to do anything rash. That was all him and his Gryffindor tendencies.
I should have known,
Harry protested. Why? Because you have known Sirius for such a long time that you can predict his actions. Draco rolled his eyes. Come off it, Harry. Stop blaming yourself. It won't help anyone.
I answered Sirius this morning, Harry muttered, trying to convince him that it's not necessary for him to come here and that I might have imagined my scar hurting.
I don't think that will work, Draco said skeptically. For one, he might already be on his way, and he doesn't strike me as stupid or willfully ignorant like Weasley is sometimes.
It's worth a try, Harry grumbled. I hate the thought of him coming back. I don't need another thing to worry about.
I know you don't, Draco sighed.
You were right, Harry said bitterly. I should have written to Lupin instead. Sometimes I wished I was more level-headed like you.
As much as that flatters me, Draco smirked, you're in the wrong house for that. Plus, my policy of sit back and wait doesn't really help in most cases either. I think the truth lies somewhere in the middle, which is why we work best when we combine our forces. The ghost of a smile appeared on Harry's lips at that, but it was lost to a deep sigh as he looked out over the sky as if expecting Hedwig back any moment. Sirius will be fine, Draco tried to reassure him. He's escaped justice for more than a year, and he will continue to do so. Only very few people know of his Agamagus form, and all of them know he's innocent.
Yes, Harry nodded, biting his lip. Still...
He let the sentence trail off, and the silence stretched between them. Draco reached for Harry's hand, enlacing their fingers. Harry squeezed back in response.